Welcome to this episode of the Death Dialogues.
I almost forgot my notes, so they're all here and I won't lose track of what I'm talking about.
So hello everyone, this is the second episode of the Death Dialogues with me. My name is Ash, if you don't know me. And last week I just gave you guys a general history of me and why I've been kind of walking this path now and thinking more about death and dying. So if you haven't watched that episode, please go back and watch it. I just talk about how I've gotten here and the reasons, and I'll talk a little bit more about it today. So yeah, today I want to talk about my journey in contemplating death in a healthy way. And I say that because a lot of the reasons why I had such a hard time with my health anxiety is because I was contemplating death in a way that wasn't very healthy. It was very attached to life, and it was very based in fear and based in not wanting to talk about it with other people and kind of keeping it to myself, and really
being so afraid of death
that I didn't know what to do with that. So it did manifest in a very serious health anxiety when I was in high school, which I talked a little bit about in last episode. So what does it mean to contemplate death in a healthy way? I think that it is different for everyone. I think that for some people, not even talking about it, or some people don't even think about it, and that it never really comes up in their lives. But for some people like me, that people that are more curious than others, it can be very helpful to contemplate death and dying in a more healthy way with people that understand, with a community of people that are walking the same path. And I think it's really important for people like me to find others to talk to so that it's not as weird or it's not as of a taboo topic. Just because death and dying, it's a very vulnerable sort of topic for a lot of people, including people that are faced with it day to day, maybe doctors or EMTs, first responders, those people, but also people who have never experienced it in their lives. Me, myself, I've never witnessed anybody die. I've never had like a really, really close family member die. I've had distant relatives die, people that I wanted to meet die, which was a very pivotal point in my journey. But I've never been there for someone really close to me. And so I think that it is important for people that experience it a lot, but it's also important for people who haven't experienced it at all, but still want to learn more about it. So how did this thought of delving into death and dying in a healthy way start for me? So right now we are in the
COVID pandemic era.
And so a lot of us are staying in and we're listening to more podcasts, reading more books, and learning more about ourselves and others with this time of reflection and stillness and kind of just reflecting on our lives in general. So I came across this series of podcasts called Ologies by Ali Ward, and I will kind of put a link in the little caption for this. This podcast has a whole array of topics. They're all ologies, so the science of things. So me and my partner, we kind of went down the list one night and we were like, wow, all of these kind of different scientific ways of studying things. And we were kind of trying to guess what the topics were. So we came across what is Thanotology. I And I was like, I wonder what that is. And it turns out that the Greek root for thanatology is thanatos, and that is the personification of death. So when I read that, I was like, I think I definitely have to listen to that because of how I was as a child and my health anxiety and how I've kind of contemplated death and dying throughout my life. I was like, I wonder if any of this podcast will give me some extra insight. So I start to listen to this podcast. My partner is in the room, and I'm like really relating to whatever is being said. Like Allie, the host, comes on and she's like, this has been such a kind of weird experience for her because she went into the podcast thinking that she would
be freaked out
by talking about death and that it would kind of make her think about it more or make her think like unnecessary things about it because in our culture we kind of steer away from the topic. So she thought that kind of leaning in would make her feel uneasy. And she says that actually the conversation really lightened her to the topic of death and dying. And it actually made it a more collaborative experience for her. Like she could kind of think about her death and think about it in a not so like taboo way. And I was like, I want that. That's what I want because it had been such a true fact in my life that it was a taboo and that it wasn't talked about, it wasn't leaned into, and it definitely
wasn't a topic that you could talk about with ease
and lightness. So I was like, wow, that is such a good practice, and I want to listen more about this. I want to hear it. So yeah, I continued to listen. She had a guest on the show. Her name is Cole Perry, and she is a designer and a thanatologist. And so she's went to school for thanatology, which is the study of death and dying. So she spoke about thanatology as a whole. She spoke about what she thinks about death and dying and how she came into her kind of walking that path of thanatology and wanting to educate the public on death and dying. So most of her work is educating funeral directors and anybody who kind of deals with death on a regular basis and is kind of wanting to be educated. So hospice workers, funeral directors, even people who would be at funerals to kind of give praise or give memorabilia to the life that was lost. Anybody like that, and she would just come in and kind of educate how to make it a better experience than it is. Because right now, in America and Canada especially, we are falling short on what it means to die and how we
kind of deal with death
and how we deal with grief in general, and it is not talked about in the way that it should be. So Cole Perry kind of comes in to these organizations and educates them on what would it be like to delve into these topics with families and with loved ones in a more compassionate way that we've never really seen before. So as you can imagine, this like completely inspired me. It inspired the podcast host, and it really like gave her the willingness to think about her own death and think about her family's death. But for me, it was like a light bulb came on. Like as soon as Cole said like the path that she is walking in her life to educate the public on death and dying, I was like, I want to do that. Like, I think that when I was young, I wanted that. Like, I wanted for myself to be vulnerable in talking about death and dying, and I wanted to help others be okay with that and be vulnerable with it as well, and kind of help people through it. And I think that through conditioning, I lost that. So when this podcast was, when I was listening to it, I was like, wow, this completely inspires me to walk this path in a way that feels good for me. And I thought to do that, I really need to get it straight in my mind what contemplating death and dying is to me, and how I could think about that in a healthy way. And this podcast also showed me that when I was having the deep health anxiety, I had kind of shifted out of contemplating about death and dying. I
had to push it away
so that I could function as a human being and to sleep and to feel like I was alive, that I wasn't dying every day. I had to really push that aside and think of myself as a living person and someone that could sustain life over time. And so I kind of pushed away the thought of death and dying because I was like, I've been thinking about this for far too long and I need to push it aside. It's like when I was young, I was so obsessed with it and I was so curious, and when people kind of shut that off and was like,
you don't need to think about it, it's like somebody coming to you and saying, don't think about an elephant.
Don't think about an elephant. And then, of course, what are you thinking about?
You're thinking about an elephant.
So when I was young and I was so obsessed with learning about death and dying and how someone could be there and then not, and everyone who I was talking to was like, you know, we don't have to talk about this. Like, you're not going to die anytime soon. You're very young. But then I was seeing young people die too, and I was like so confused. So when people were like, no, you don't need to think about that, then that's all I could think about. And then when I was in high school, it was like me. Like my whole existence was about death and dying. And what if it happens to me? And what if it happens to somebody else that I love? And so to get out of that, I had to completely push it away. I had to shift my thinking to death all the time to life. And so this podcast made me feel like I could come back to contemplating in a healthier way. And I'm really glad that I pushed it away for such a long time so that now I can, like, in a healthy way, introduce it into my life. Like, not all at once, but every step of the way, like, introduce it a little bit more. It's like I'm a child again, and I'm contemplating it to myself instead of contemplating it toward other people and kind of projecting it. I'm kind of in that space of being curious about it, like when I was a child, and being okay with it being just me and my experience instead of kind of projecting it onto other adults to kind of give me an answer, if that makes sense. So now I'm opening up that chapter in this story of mine to get
really curious, unapologetically so,
about death and dying. And this, before I had any societal or cultural influences, I was purely interested in the dying process and how people leave this earth in that way, and how people are in their phases of dying and they're there and then they're not anymore. And I'm still working through that today, and I'm so grateful to be having this kind of chance to contemplate it more deeply within myself. Since then, I have been taking an end-of-life doula online course, which I learn a bit more about death and dying and how to support others in that way, and how to contemplate my own death and dying experience, whether that be tragic or when I'm old and dying of old age. I can really contemplate in a healthier way of what it means in those final moments to leave the world that we live in now and pass on to whatever is next. And of course,
none of us know what that is concretely, and nobody will ever know.
But it is nice to me to be able to contemplate what I would want in my last moments and what I would want from my family to honor my memory and honor my life. Yeah, and so that's where I am with it right now. I'm still learning so much, and everything I learned is so inspirational to me, and I think that's what you really want from something that you're studying. Like, you want every time you're learning about something, like, wow, this is kind of unveiling more passion in me. Like, it's kind of opening those doors to that child that was like, yeah, I want to learn more about death and dying. And not being ashamed of it, not being apologetic about it, but just knowing that this is kind of the path I want to take and being okay with that. And part of this journey for me is that I don't want to cling to this life as if it's a lifeboat and I'm in a pool full of sharks. Why? Because
I don't want to live in fear anymore.
I don't want to be in that health anxiety atmosphere where I think that every moment of my life is the last. And maybe that could be healthy in a way, and that's what I'm trying to work towards. But to be afraid in that moment, to be afraid of what's to come next, that is purely fear. And that is not something that I want to cling on to. It's not something that I want in my life all the time. Of course, there's a relatively healthy
amount to be fearful when you're in danger.
When you're in dire danger, but it got to a point where I was physically feeling sick about maybe dying, and that wasn't even a for sure thing. So I think that it's really important for me to not cling on to life more than I have to. I love my life, I love my partner, I love my family, and I love the path that I'm walking. But at the end of the day, we will all die at some point. And to be really rooted in that and knowing that one day this life will be over, whether I like it or not, and be okay with that, that is what I'm working towards. And I think that it's so valuable for some of us to walk this path so that when others are in their final moments or when others need serious help contemplating, or even someone just to sit with them and hold space for them, people like me who want to walk this path are going to be so important for those people. And I really it causes me to feel super emotional because I think that that's exactly what I want to do. I totally want to be there for people that were feeling the same way as I was when I was having those panic attacks, but I want to kind of ease their fear. I want to be there for them, and I want to sit with them, and I want them to know that I have
felt similar things even though I wasn't dying. And that's a conversation that may or may not happen with my clients, with people that I connect with when they are in the phases of death and dying. But for those that really want to know more about me, I can't wait to have that conversation.
And I want them to know that I know the darkest parts of myself when it comes to death and dying, and I can sit in that with them. I'm totally prepared for that. So I'm going to end on that note. I hope you guys have liked this episode. If you want to learn more about me, definitely check out the first episode. And if you have anything you want to talk to me about or you want me to cover in future episodes, please let me know. But I'll just continue to talk about this journey for me and what I hope to get out of it. And it is a journey. It's such an adventure, and I can't wait to share it with you guys.